Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of Normandy. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. June 1944 marked the beginning of what military historians consider one of the most intense psychological warfare operations ever conducted on European soil. Allied forces had crossed the Channel and established a tenuous foothold on the beaches of Normandy. Among these forces was a specialized unit stationed near Caen, at the eastern edge of the invasion front. What would unfold over the following weeks in a small farming region just south of Bayeux would become one of the most unsettling documented cases of psychological disintegration ever recorded in military archives. Staff Sergeant Malcolm Hayes had arrived with the British forces on June 7th, one day after the initial landings. His unit was part of the push inland towards strategic positions around the Norman countryside. Hayes was 32 years old, remarkably older than the average infantryman of 26. Before the war, he had been a mathematics teacher at a prestigious school in Sussex. His academic background, exceptional eyesight, and unnatural steadiness under pressure had made him a natural candidate for specialized training. By 1944, Hayes was considered one of the most effective marksmen in his battalion, with confirmed eliminations exceeding 47 enemy combatants during operations in North Africa and Italy. Military records from the 21st Army Group indicate that Hayes operated primarily in the hedgerow country south of Bayeux. The bocage, as locals called it, consisted of ancient earthen mounds topped with dense vegetation, creating natural corridors that channeled troop movements into predictable pathways. For a marksman like Hayes, this terrain offered ideal hunting conditions. According to patrol logs recovered from British field headquarters, Hayes would often occupy forward positions alone, sometimes remaining stationary for up to 18 hours. Before his deployment to Normandy, Hayes had developed a reputation for methodical precision. Fellow soldiers described him as detached yet cordial, a man who maintained a professional distance while never seeming cold. Lieutenant Philip Thornton, who had served alongside Hayes in North Africa, later testified to military investigators that Hayes approached his role with the calm deliberation of a scientist conducting an experiment. Hayes maintained meticulous logs of every engagement, recording not just technical details of each shot, but also environmental conditions, physical sensations, and occasionally philosophical observations about the nature of his work. In one recovered journal entry from February 1944, while stationed in Italy, Hayes wrote, "The scope creates a curious paradox. It brings the target closer visually while creating emotional distance. Through these lenses, a man becomes a problem of physics, a question of trajectory, wind, and timing. Only after the shot, when I lower the rifle, does he become human again." I find myself wondering if this transition happens too late. A declassified report authored by Captain Julian Mercer, Hayes' commanding officer, noted a peculiar incident on June 12, 1944. Hayes had returned from a 20-hour forward deployment, visibly agitated. When questioned about his state, he reportedly said only that he had seen something impossible through his scope. The report indicates that Hayes requested immediate reassignment to another sector, a request that was denied due to the tactical situation. Captain Mercer noted that Hayes appeared unusually pale and refused food for approximately 36 hours following the incident. Military psychologists reviewing the case in the 1960s theorized that this incident represented the first documented break in Hayes's psychological state. Dr. Eleanor Reeves, a consultant to the Ministry of Defense, noted in her assessment, Hayes's request for reassignment represents a significant aberration in his behavioral pattern. Throughout his prior service, he had never once requested a change of assignment, even during the most intense operations in North Africa. Whatever he experienced on June 12th appears to have fundamentally disturbed his equilibrium. The Norman countryside in 1944 was a place transformed by war, yet still bearing the ancient patterns of rural French life. Local residents who survived the conflict later provided testimonies to Allied investigators about strange occurrences in the region between Bayeux and Saint-Lô. Madame Elise Fournier, a dairy farmer whose property lay along the British advance route, reported to investigators in 1947 that she had encountered a British soldier sitting motionless in her hayloft for 2 consecutive days. The description she provided matched Hayes's physical characteristics. When asked what the soldier was doing, she stated simply, "He was watching something that wasn't there. His eyes never blinked." Fournier's statement, recorded by Lieutenant Howard Richardson of the British Historical Section, included additional details that investigators initially dismissed as confusion or embellishment. She claimed that the soldier had spoken to her only once, asking what day it was. When she told him it was June 14th, he appeared confused and consulted a small notebook, muttering that it should be the 19th. Most strikingly, Fournier reported that the soldier had 2 identical rifles, which he alternately looked through, as if comparing what he saw through each scope. Military records confirm that Hayes was indeed listed as deployed on reconnaissance during the period of Fournier's encounter, with no specific location documented. His unit had recorded him as departing their position near Tilly-sur-Seulles on the morning of June 13th, returning late on June 15th. The gap in surveillance raises questions about Hayes's activities during this critical period, a 48-hour window during which, according to Fournier's testimony, he was exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior. Military medical records indicate a significant increase in sedative prescriptions to Hayes's unit during the second week of June 1944. A requisition form signed by unit medic Walter Sullivan shows a specific request for additional phenobarbital, with a notation that read, "Required for acute anxiety cases, particularly sniper team members experiencing sleep disturbances." Sullivan's personal log, discovered among his effects after he was killed in action on June 22nd, contains several entries regarding Hayes. The most detailed, dated June 15th, reads, "Hayes returned from recon today. Physical condition normal, but mental state concerning. Reports inability to sleep for 72+ hours. Claims his scope is showing inconsistencies in time. Administered 200 milliliters phenobarbital. Patient became agitated when I suggested rest, insisting he needs to maintain observation. Recommend psychiatric evaluation if symptoms persist. No psychiatric evaluation was ever conducted." The rapid pace of operations and the shortage of medical personnel meant that psychological concerns were often overlooked unless they completely incapacitated a soldier. Hayes, despite his increasingly strange behavior, remained functional in his military role. In fact, records indicate that between June 15th and 18th, he was credited with eliminating 5 German machine gun positions that had been impeding the advance of British infantry units near Tilly-sur-Seulles. Corporal Vincent Rawlings, who served as Hayes's spotter during this period, later provided testimony that adds another layer to the unfolding mystery. In a statement given to investigators in 1946, Rawlings described Hayes's behavior as mechanically perfect but humanly wrong. He elaborated, "Hayes no longer spoke except to relay technical information. His shooting was more accurate than I'd ever seen, almost preternaturally so. He would call shots that seemed impossible, given the conditions, accounting for variables I couldn't even perceive. But what disturbed me most was his habit of narrating his shots before taking them, as if he had already seen their outcome." Rawlings's statement includes a specific example from June 17th. "We were observing a German patrol moving through a hedgerow about 600 yards out. Hayes suddenly said, 'The officer will stop by that fallen tree in exactly 17 seconds. He will remove his cap with his left hand while looking at his map. The shot will enter through his right temple.' It happened exactly as he described, second by second. When I asked how he could possibly know those details in advance, he just smiled and said, 'I've seen this before.'" On June 16th, Hayes was ordered to provide overwatch for an advance near the village of Tilly-sur-Seulles, a critical junction in the battle for Normandy. German resistance in the sector was particularly fierce, with the 12th SS Panzer Division fighting a determined holding action. Hayes established his position in the bell tower of a partially destroyed church, with a clear line of sight to German positions approximately 800 yards to the south. The Church of Saint-Pierre in Tilly-sur-Seulles dated back to the 12th century. Its stone bell tower had survived numerous conflicts throughout the centuries, including the 100 Years' War and the French Revolution. Local histories indicate that the tower had served as an observation post during previous conflicts as well, offering commanding views across the rolling Norman landscape. What made Hayes's selection of this position particularly noteworthy was that he had specifically requested it, despite the fact that military intelligence had identified it as a likely target for German artillery. Captain Mercer's log contains a notation questioning this decision. Hayes, insistent on church tower position despite obvious risk, claims it has to be this location. When pressed, stated cryptically that it's already happened there. A proved request given his track record and the tactical advantage offered by the elevation. What transpired during the next 72 hours remains a subject of military investigation, even decades after the war concluded. According to a report filed by Lieutenant Gordon Winfield, who commanded the infantry section Hayes was supporting, radio contact with Hayes became increasingly erratic. The report contains transcripts of Hayes' communications beginning with standard target identification and wind calculations, but gradually devolving into disjointed observations about the space between breaths and windows where they shouldn't be. Radio operator Samuel Price, who maintained the communications log during this period, noted increasing concerns about Hayes's mental state. In his personal diary, recovered after the war, Price wrote, "Hayes is speaking nonsense half the time now, talking about seeing himself through his own scope. Mentioned today that he was observing from two positions simultaneously. Command is concerned but unwilling to pull him out given his effectiveness." 5 confirmed eliminations today, including a German officer at extreme range that nobody else could have made. A particularly disturbing transmission, logged at 22:13 hours on June 18th, reads, "Primary observer reports temporal anomaly. Target appears to be aware of shot before it is taken. Secondary observer confirms identical phenomenon from southern position. The window is narrowing. Convergence at 0300. When Lieutenant Winfield requested clarification, Hayes responded with what the log describes as mechanical precision in a voice unlike his own. Both observers occupying same temporal reference point. Paradox requires resolution. Final shot scheduled for 300 hours. After that, only one observer remains. At 300 hours on June 19th, Hayes made his final radio transmission. The transcript reads simply, "I can see myself through my own scope. He's watching me, watching him. This is the last shot." Radio logs indicate that a single shot was heard over the open channel immediately following this transmission. Price noted in the log, "Sound signature consistent with Mauser K98, not British Lee Enfield." This detail would later become significant when compared with the German after-action report. When a relief team reached Hayes' position at dawn on June 19th, they found his rifle perfectly positioned, ammunition meticulously arranged, and a detailed log of environmental conditions affecting ballistics. Hayes himself was gone. No signs of enemy action were evident. The church bell tower showed no damage from artillery or small arms fire. Hayes had simply vanished from a position that, according to military doctrine, should have been impossible to leave undetected. Sergeant Wallace Denman, who led the relief team, provided a detailed report of what they discovered. The report, classified until 1967, describes a scene that defied conventional explanation. Rifle positioned precisely, bipod deployed, bolt open as if a round had just been chambered and fired. Spent cartridge on the floor beside approximately 4 dozen others arranged in a circular pattern. No blood or signs of struggle. Hayes's equipment all present except for his sidearm and field glasses. Most strangely, we discovered a second sniper's log that does not match Hayes's handwriting, containing mirror image calculations of those in his official log. Same targets, same conditions, but calculated as if viewing from the opposite direction. The subsequent search operation covered a 3-mile radius around the church. No trace of Hayes was discovered. German records captured after the war indicated no prisoner matching his description had been taken. Local civilians reported no sightings. Staff Sergeant Malcolm Hayes had effectively ceased to exist. The mystery deepened when Sergeant Denman's team discovered Hayes's field glasses, still focused on a position at the edge of a forest approximately 800 yards to the south of the church. Looking through them, Denman observed what he described as a sniper hide consistent with German doctrine, partially concealed at the tree line. When a patrol was dispatched to investigate this position, they found evidence that it had indeed been recently occupied. Cigarette butts of German manufacture, empty ration containers, and a single spent cartridge case from a 7.2 Mauser rifle, the standard German sniper weapon. The German position yielded one other piece of evidence that investigators found particularly disturbing: a torn page from a British Army-issue notebook containing what appeared to be ballistic calculations in Hayes's distinctive handwriting. The calculations precisely matched those found in Hayes' log in the church tower, but were labeled secondary position observations. Military investigators led by Major Harold Blackwood conducted extensive interviews with Hayes's unit members in July 1944 while combat operations were still ongoing. These interviews, declassified in 1969, reveal a troubling pattern that emerged in the days before Hayes's disappearance. Private Morris Jensen, who had shared a foxhole with Hayes on June 14th, reported that Hayes had begun documenting his observations in a small leather-bound journal. Jensen recalled Hayes writing continuously through the night, even when it was too dark to see the page. Jensen told investigators, "I asked him once what he was writing, and he just looked at me with a strange smile and said he was keeping 2 sets of notes, one for what he saw through the scope and one for what the scope saw through him. I thought he was just being cryptic. You know how these sniper types get. But then he showed me the journal. Half the pages were filled with normal observations, wind speed, distance calculations, target descriptions. But the other half, the handwriting wasn't his. It wasn't anyone's handwriting I'd ever seen. And the language, I couldn't read it, but it didn't look like any language I've ever seen." The journal was never recovered. Jensen's testimony is corroborated by similar accounts from other unit members. Corporal Rawlings described finding Hayes staring into his shaving mirror one morning, moving his lips as if in conversation with his reflection. When Rawlings asked whom he was talking to, Hayes reportedly replied, "The other observer, we're synchronizing our calculations." Perhaps most disturbing was the testimony of Captain Mercer himself, who admitted to investigators that he had begun to harbor concerns about Hayes's mental state as early as their deployment to Italy in 1943. Mercer described an incident during operations near Monte Cassino. "Hayes came to my tent after midnight, soaking wet, despite there being no rain. He asked me with absolute seriousness whether I had ever considered that a bullet fired today might actually impact yesterday. When I dismissed this as fatigue-induced philosophizing, he became agitated, insisting that he had seen it happen. The next morning, he had no recollection of the conversation." Lieutenant Winfield's testimony provided further insights into Hayes's deteriorating mental state. According to Winfield, Hayes had become obsessed with a specific German officer who appeared regularly at the edge of the forest south of Tilly-sur-Seulles. Hayes reportedly described the officer as watching back through his own optics. Radio logs show Hayes requesting permission to eliminate this target repeatedly between June 16th and 18th, but was denied authorization due to concerns about revealing his position. Winfield's statement includes a troubling detail omitted from his official report. On the afternoon of June 18th, Hayes had radioed with unusual urgency, claiming that the German officer was no longer wearing the correct uniform. When pressed for clarification, Hayes had described seeing the officer now wearing British battle dress. Most disturbing was Hayes's claim that, viewing the officer's face through his scope, he had recognized himself. On the evening of June 18th, Hayes broke radio protocol to transmit a cryptic message. "He's not German. The uniform is wrong. The time is wrong." When pressed for clarification, Hayes did not respond for several minutes. His final authorized communication, time-stamped at 23:47 hours on June 18th, consisted of a single sentence. "I understand now. I'm looking at myself." The mystery surrounding Hayes's disappearance might have remained a footnote in the chaotic history of the Normandy campaign had it not been for the discovery made by French civilian contractors during reconstruction efforts in 1952. While clearing rubble from the church in Tilly-sur-Seulles, workers uncovered a hidden chamber beneath the bell tower. Inside, they found a collection of spent cartridge cases arranged in a precise geometric pattern. According to the official report, filed with the British War Office, the cartridges numbered exactly 47, matching Hayes' confirmed elimination count prior to the Normandy campaign. François Beaumont, the foreman who oversaw the restoration work, provided a detailed statement to local authorities. In it, he described the hidden chamber as appearing to have been sealed deliberately with stones and mortar that did not match the original construction. The chamber itself was approximately 6 feet square, with no apparent original purpose in the church's architecture. Beaumont noted that the cartridge cases had been arranged to form what he described as a perfect star pattern, with lines connecting the points to create a shape like an hourglass. More disturbing was the discovery of a series of photographs apparently taken through a rifle scope. The photos, developed from film found in the chamber, showed the same location from slightly different angles. Each image captured a sniper in position, photographed through what appeared to be the targeting optics of another rifle. The final image in the sequence clearly showed Hayes himself, looking through his scope directly at the camera. Technical analysis of the photographs revealed several anomalies that defied explanation. First, photographic experts determined that the images had been captured using a specialized military camera designed for reconnaissance, not the kind of personal camera a soldier might carry. Second, the angle and elevation of the shots indicated they had been taken from the precise spot in the forest where the German sniper position had been identified, a location that would have been behind enemy lines and inaccessible to British personnel at the time. Most inexplicably, the time stamps on the negatives indicated they had all been taken at exactly 0300 hours on June 19th, the precise moment of Hayes's final transmission and disappearance. French authorities transferred these materials to British military intelligence in 1953. The subsequent investigation involved both military and medical specialists. Dr. Alistair Simmons, a psychiatric consultant to the War Office, reviewed the evidence and interviewed several members of Hayes's unit who were still serving. His findings, sealed until 1967, concluded that Hayes had experienced a severe dissociative break, likely triggered by prolonged stress and sleep deprivation. Dr. Simmons' report includes a theoretical framework he termed combat-induced temporal displacement syndrome, a condition he hypothesized might occur in individuals subjected to extreme psychological stress while engaged in activities requiring intense focus and dissociation. He wrote, "The sniper's role demands a psychological state unlike any other in combat. The individual must maintain hyper-focused attention while emotionally detaching from the human implications of their actions. In rare cases, this combination of focus and detachment might facilitate a fracturing of temporal perception, a condition where past, present, and future become subjectively permeable." However, Dr. Simmons's report failed to explain several key aspects of the case. The photographs, when analyzed by technical experts, appeared to have been taken from positions that would have been physically impossible given the landscape and the limitations of photography equipment available in 1944. Furthermore, metallurgical analysis of the cartridge cases indicated they had been fired from Hayes's rifle, but carbon dating suggested they were manufactured in 1943, a year before Hayes's deployment to Normandy. Most puzzling was the film itself. Kodak specialists consulted during the investigation determined that the film stock was of a type not manufactured until 1947, 3 years after the events in question. When confronted with this anachronism, the lead investigator for the War Office reportedly remarked, "Either this evidence was planted years after the incident, or we are dealing with something that defies rational explanation." In 1961, American researcher Dr. Margaret Holloway conducted interviews with residents of Tilly-sur-Seulles as part of a broader study on civilian experiences during the liberation. Her unpublished findings include a curious account from local farmer Auguste Dupont, who claimed to have encountered a British soldier matching Hayes's description on June 25, 1944, 6 days after his official disappearance. According to Dupont's testimony, the soldier was wandering along the edge of his property, appearing disoriented and speaking incoherently. When Dupont approached, the soldier reportedly asked what year it was. Upon being told it was 1944, the soldier became agitated and insisted it was 1945 and that the war was already over. Dupont's account describes the soldier as having eyes that had seen too much and carrying papers covered in strange symbols. Dupont further claimed that the soldier had asked him specifically about the church at Tilly-sur-Seulles, wanting to know if it had happened yet. When Dupont inquired what he meant, the soldier allegedly replied, "The shot that goes both ways." Before departing, the soldier had given Dupont a brass cartridge case, asking him to place it in the church tower on the morning of June 19, 1945, exactly 1 year after Hayes's disappearance. Dupont claimed he had dismissed this as the ravings of a battle-shocked soldier and had discarded the cartridge case. Holloway's research notes indicate that she initially dismissed Dupont's account as confabulation, or an attempt to insert himself into a local mystery that had, by the 1960s, become something of a regional legend. However, when she showed Dupont a collection of photographs of British soldiers from the period, he immediately and unhesitatingly identified Hayes's service photograph, despite never having been told the name of the missing sniper. The most compelling evidence in the Hayes case emerged in 1965, when British military archivists discovered a misfiled after-action report from the 12th SS Panzer Division. The report, dated June 17, 1944, detailed the elimination of a British sniper position in the Tilly-sur-Seulles church tower. According to the German account, a specialized marksman from their unit had observed the British position for several days before taking a single, precisely calculated shot at 0300 hours on June 19th, exactly matching the time of Hayes's final transmission. The German report includes a curious addendum. Their sniper reported that the British marksman appeared to be looking directly at him in the moment before the shot was fired, despite the fact that the German position was concealed and outside the effective range of Hayes' rifle. The German sniper's name was recorded as Oberscharführer Matthias Haas, a phonetic mirror of Malcolm Hayes. No record of a German soldier named Matthias Haas exists in SS personnel files. This mirroring extended beyond names. When British investigators compared the ballistic data from Hayes's log with the calculations in the German report, they found them to be identical, but reversed, as if each marksman had occupied the other's position. The trajectory calculations, wind adjustments, and elevation settings were perfect inversions of each other. The German report contains one other detail that investigators found particularly disturbing. The sniper Haas reportedly returned from his mission in a state of extreme agitation, claiming he had seen himself through the British sniper's scope the moment before firing. He was placed under medical observation, but vanished from the field hospital that same night. His equipment was found neatly arranged in his quarters, including his sniper rifle, with the bolt missing. Historical researchers later determined that the 12th SS Panzer Division had indeed deployed specialized sniper units in the Tilly-sur-Seulles area during mid-June 1944. These units primarily comprised young soldiers selected for their marksmanship and trained specifically to target Allied officers and specialized personnel. However, divisional records make no mention of a sniper named Haas, nor do they document any successful elimination of a British sniper position on June 19th. The German medical officer who allegedly treated Haas, Dr. Werner Kleinschmidt, was captured by Allied forces in July 1944. During his interrogation, he was questioned about the Haas case. Transcripts of this interrogation, declassified in 1973, reveal that Kleinschmidt recalled treating a sniper who had returned from a mission near Tilly-sur-Seulles in an extreme state of psychological distress. Kleinschmidt described the soldier as obsessed with the idea that he had somehow changed places with his target and convinced he was now trapped in the wrong uniform, on the wrong side of the war. Most significantly, Kleinschmidt stated that the soldier had spoken fluent English with what he described as a distinctive British accent, despite having been born and raised in Munich according to his military records. The soldier had disappeared from the field hospital the same night, leaving behind a notebook filled with what Kleinschmidt described as mirror writing, text that could only be read when held up to a reflective surface. Former Captain Julian Mercer, interviewed in 1968 for a classified military psychology study, offered perhaps the most disturbing perspective on the Hayes case. According to Mercer, Hayes had begun speaking of temporal dislocations several weeks before the Normandy landings. During their deployment in Italy, Hayes had reportedly claimed that he could sometimes see moments that hadn't happened yet through his scope. Mercer had dismissed these comments as the harmless eccentricities of a skilled but stressed operator. However, Mercer recalled a conversation with Hayes just hours before their departure for Normandy. Hayes had described in precise detail the church tower at Tilly-sur-Seulles, where he would eventually be posted, despite never having been to Normandy before. More troubling, Hayes had sketched a precise map of German positions around the town, including defensive emplacements that Allied intelligence had not yet identified. When these positions were later confirmed by reconnaissance, Mercer had assumed Hayes had simply made educated guesses based on standard German doctrine. Mercer's 1968 testimony includes one detail he had omitted from all previous statements. On the morning of June 18th, he had visited Hayes' position in the church tower to deliver updated intelligence on German movements. Upon arriving, he found Hayes in conversation with someone Mercer couldn't see. When questioned, Hayes had calmly explained that he was coordinating with the other observer. When Mercer pointed out that Hayes was operating alone, Hayes had smiled strangely and said, "He'll be here tomorrow," or perhaps he was here yesterday. The scope makes it difficult to be certain. What Mercer could not explain was Hayes's final notation in his logbook, recovered from the bell tower position. The last entry, timed at 0255 hours on June 19th, reads, "The target is myself. I am observing from the tree line south of town. I will fire in 5 minutes. Both of us will." The most rational explanation for Hayes's disappearance remains desertion. The psychological pressures of his role, combined with the intense combat conditions of Normandy, could certainly have triggered a breakdown. Military records indicate that dozens of Allied soldiers deserted during the chaotic early weeks of the invasion, with several remaining unaccounted for decades after the war. Military psychiatrist Colonel James Harrison, who reviewed the Hayes case in 1970, proposed what he termed a cascading psychological breakdown culminating in fugue state. In his assessment, Hayes had experienced progressive dissociation under extreme stress, eventually developing a delusional belief that he had somehow become split between two physical locations. The delusion had then facilitated a fugue state, a condition in which an individual effectively flees from their established identity, often developing a new one with no memory of their previous life. Harrison theorized that Hayes, in this fugue state, had fled his position and established a new identity, possibly as a displaced civilian. Given the chaotic conditions of wartime France, with thousands of refugees on the move and documentation systems in disarray, it would have been relatively simple for a single soldier to disappear. Harrison noted that several cases of military deserters living under assumed identities had been discovered in the decades following the war, lending credence to this theory. Yet this explanation fails to address the physical evidence discovered in the church tower, the contradictory witness testimonies, and the inexplicable German report. If Hayes had simply fled his position, how did he leave the fortified church tower undetected? How could he have arranged the cartridge cases and taken the photographs? And what explains the German account of eliminating a sniper at precisely the moment of Hayes's final transmission? The Hayes case was officially closed by British military authorities in 1969, with his status changed from missing in action to killed in action for administrative purposes. His name appears on the Bayeux Memorial among the 1-800 Commonwealth service members with no known grave. The official cause of death is listed simply as combat operations. The formal closure of the investigation did little to resolve the fundamental mysteries surrounding Hayes's disappearance. If anything, the passage of time has only deepened the enigma, as additional evidence has periodically surfaced that contradicts official conclusions. In 1977, a retired French policeman named Robert Lefebvre came forward with a curious account. In July 1944, while serving as a local constable in a village approximately 20 miles from Tilly-sur-Seulles, he had processed a British soldier found wandering without identification or unit insignia. The soldier had claimed to be Malcolm Hayes, but had been unable to provide his service number or unit details. Medical examination had revealed no physical injuries, but the doctor had noted severe disorientation and possible amnesia. According to Lefebvre's records, the soldier had been detained briefly before being transferred to a British field hospital. However, British military medical records from the period contain no record of a patient matching this description. Lefebvre's official report, filed with the French gendarmerie, had apparently never been forwarded to British authorities. Most strikingly, Lefebvre recalled that the soldier had been carrying a single item of military equipment, a rifle bolt that he refused to relinquish, keeping it clutched in his hand even while sleeping. When asked about it, the soldier had reportedly replied, "It's the only proof that I'm real." In 1995, during renovations to the rebuilt church in Tilly-sur-Seulles, workers discovered a rusted rifle bolt sealed within the cornerstone. Metallurgical analysis confirmed it came from a No. 4 Monkey IT sniper rifle, the precise model issued to Malcolm Hayes. The bolt showed damage consistent with having been struck by a high-velocity round. More curiously, the serial number matched that of Hayes's issued weapon, which had reportedly been recovered intact from the bell tower in 1944. The cornerstone containing the bolt had been laid during reconstruction efforts in 1947. Church records indicate that the ceremony had been attended primarily by local residents, with no British military personnel officially present. However, the mason responsible for sealing the cornerstone, Marcel Dubois, had noted in his personal journal that a tall Englishman with haunted eyes had approached him the morning of the ceremony, giving him the rifle bolt and a sealed envelope, asking that both be placed within the cornerstone. Dubois had complied with the request, but had opened the envelope first. Inside, he found a single sheet of paper bearing what appeared to be ballistic calculations and a brief note written in both English and German. The note read simply, "The observer and the observed, two sides of the same moment, the shot that never ends." Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Hayes case emerged in 2002, when British military archives were being digitized. A photograph taken by a reconnaissance aircraft on June 19, 1944, captured the area around Tilly-sur-Seulles approximately 1 hour after Hayes's final transmission. Enhanced digital analysis revealed two figures in the image, one in the church tower and one at the edge of the forest to the south. Despite the distance between them, both appear to be in identical positions, both aiming rifles, both seemingly focused on each other through their respective scopes. Image analysis experts from the Ministry of Defense examined this photograph using advanced enhancement techniques not available during the original investigation. Their report, classified but partially leaked to military historians in 2007, indicates that despite the low resolution of the original image, both figures appear to be wearing identical uniforms and equipment. Most disturbing was the analyst's conclusion that both figures present identical posture and dimensional characteristics consistent with being the same individual. The true fate of Staff Sergeant Malcolm Hayes remains unknown. His case exists in military archives as an anomaly, a strange footnote in the brutal arithmetic of war, where losses are usually quantifiable and explainable. What happened in that Norman church tower in the pre-dawn hours of June 19, 1944, defies conventional explanation. Some veteran snipers who have studied the Hayes case suggest a phenomenon they call scope psychosis, a dissociative state that can occur when a marksman spends too many hours observing human targets through magnified optics. The unnatural intimacy of watching another human being, unaware they are being observed, combined with the godlike power to end their life with a single motion, creates a psychological burden few can comprehend. Master Sergeant Clarence Wilkins, a sniper instructor with the U.S. Army's Advanced Marksmanship Unit, described this phenomenon in a 1983 interview. Looking through the scope, you're simultaneously detached from and intimately connected to your target. You see their faces, their expressions, the moment they realize they're about to die. Some snipers report feeling like they're inhabiting two spaces at once, their physical position and the position of their target. It's a unique psychological stress that can fracture perception in ways we don't fully understand. In this theory, Hayes simply succumbed to the weight of his role. The mirroring he perceived, seeing himself through his own scope, represents the ultimate collapse of the psychological barrier between observer and observed, between killer and killed. In the moment before taking a life, Hayes had somehow experienced himself as both. Military psychologists who reviewed the case in the 1960s proposed a more clinical explanation. Hayes suffered from extreme sleep deprivation, combined with what would now be diagnosed as acute stress disorder. His disappearance was either desertion following a psychotic break or, more likely, a deliberate suicide that was simply not documented correctly in the confusion of the ongoing battle. The photographic evidence and the arranged cartridge cases were dismissed as either elaborate preparations for his suicide or evidence tampering by unknown parties after the fact. The German report was attributed to a translation error or deliberate misinformation. Yet these rational explanations cannot fully account for the timing coincidences, the mirrored names, or the dual figures captured in the reconnaissance photograph. Some aspects of the Hayes case remained stubbornly resistant to conventional explanation. In 1967, a local historian in Bayeux interviewed an elderly Norman farmer who claimed to have encountered a British soldier near Tilly-sur-Seulles in the summer of 1944. The farmer described the soldier as appearing disoriented, repeatedly checking his watch and mumbling about being in the wrong time. When the farmer offered assistance, the soldier reportedly asked, "Is it still June 19th?" When told it was actually July 3rd, the soldier seemed relieved, but then disturbed, saying, "Then I've been gone for 2 weeks, but I haven't fired yet." The farmer's account includes a final detail that investigators found particularly troubling. He claimed the soldier was carrying a rifle with a telescopic sight, but the bolt action had been removed. When asked about this, the soldier reportedly said, "I took it out so I couldn't fire, but it didn't matter. He fired anyway." The historian who documented this account, François Leclerc, initially dismissed it as an embellished retelling influenced by local rumors about the missing British sniper. However, when he later gained access to Hayes's military records as part of his research, he was struck by a detail that had not been publicly disclosed. Hayes's rifle, found in the church tower, had been fully functional except for damage to the firing pin. Damage that would have rendered the weapon incapable of firing, despite appearing otherwise intact. British military archives contain thousands of reports of missing personnel from the Normandy campaign. Most have rational, if tragic, explanations: bodies that were never recovered, men who fell in unwitnessed circumstances, documentation lost in the chaos of combat. The Hayes case stands apart not because he vanished, but because of the unsettling evidence that suggests he was somehow both present and absent, both observer and observed, caught in some inexplicable loop of perception. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a cognitive neuroscientist who studied cases of extreme psychological stress during warfare, reviewed the Hayes case in 1998 as part of a broader research project on perceptual anomalies in combat situations. Her assessment offers perhaps the most sophisticated scientific perspective on the case. Under conditions of extreme stress, sleep deprivation, and the unique perceptual framework imposed by sniper operations, it is possible that Hayes experienced a profound fragmentation of temporal perception. The human brain constructs our experience of time from disparate neural processes. When these processes are disrupted by trauma or extreme conditions, perception of sequential events can become distorted or even circular. Warren proposed what she termed a perception loop, a condition in which an individual becomes trapped in a subjective experience of the same moment, perceived from multiple perspectives simultaneously. In Hayes's case, she wrote, the sniper's scope may have served as both the trigger and the framework for this perceptual distortion. The act of looking through the scope at another human, potentially another sniper looking back, created a unique psychological circumstance in which the boundary between observer and observed became subjectively permeable. The church in Tilly-sur-Seulles still stands today, rebuilt after the war, but incorporating elements of the original structure. Local residents report no unusual phenomena associated with the site. Tourists occasionally visit, drawn by the town's significance in the battle for Normandy, unaware of the strange case that unfolded in its bell tower. Yet subtle reminders of the Hayes mystery persist. The church's current caretaker, Jean-Paul Moreau, reports that occasionally visitors to the bell tower experience unexplained equipment malfunctions, cameras that cease functioning, watches that stop at precisely 3 a.m., compasses that spin erratically. Most curiously, Moreau claims that on clear days, visitors looking south toward the forest edge sometimes report seeing a momentary reflection, as if of sunlight on glass, from a position where no structure or vehicle exists. Military snipers operate in a psychological space few civilians can comprehend. They observe life through a magnified lens that simultaneously brings their targets closer while creating emotional distance. They exist in a liminal space between detached observation and intimate killing. Perhaps what happened to Malcolm Hayes was simply the ultimate extension of this paradox, a man who looked so long and so deeply into the act of killing that he became both killer and killed, observer and observed. The final entry in Major Blackwood's 1969 investigation summary reads, "The Hayes case defies conventional explanation within the parameters of known psychological phenomena or battlefield occurrences. While desertion or death by enemy action remain the most plausible explanations, the physical evidence and witness testimonies introduce elements that cannot be reconciled with these conclusions." It is the recommendation of this investigator that the case be closed administratively, while acknowledging that certain aspects remain unexplained. Blackwood's personal notes, not included in the official report, but discovered among his papers after his death in 1983, reveal his private thoughts on the case. After 25 years of military service, including 2 world wars, I considered myself immune to surprise or bewilderment. The Hayes case has shattered that complacency. If even half the evidence is reliable, we are confronted with something that transcends our understanding of reality itself. I find myself now hesitating before looking through binoculars or a camera viewfinder, irrationally afraid of what might be looking back. In the church registry at Bayeux, a curious entry appears dated June 19, 1945, exactly 1 year after Hayes's disappearance. It records the burial of an unidentified British soldier found near Tilly-sur-Seulles. The cause of death is listed as a single gunshot wound to the head, consistent with a high-powered rifle. The entry notes that despite extensive decomposition, the uniform insignia identified him as a member of a sniper unit. Most strangely, the registry notes that the body was found with 2 identification tags. Both bore the name Malcolm Hayes, but with different service numbers, one British, one unrecognized. The burial location is not specified, and no grave bearing Hayes's name exists in any military or civilian cemetery in Normandy. Local rumor suggests that the unidentified soldier was buried in unconsecrated ground near the forest edge south of Tilly-sur-Seulles, the precise location where the German sniper position had been identified. However, no official record of such a burial exists, and subsequent searches of the area have yielded no evidence of a grave. In 2010, a retired British Army officer conducting research for a book on Commonwealth war graves discovered a curious discrepancy in the Bayeux Memorial records. The official casualty list includes Malcolm Hayes as missing, presumed killed in action, with a date of death recorded as June 19, 1944. However, the internal registration card used by Commonwealth War Graves Commission staff to maintain records contains a handwritten annotation that reads, "Second memorial listing requested. See also, Haas, M. German War Cemetery, Macabre." No such listing exists in the official records of the German War Cemetery at Macabre, which contains over 21,000 German military burials from the Normandy campaign. However, visitors to the cemetery have occasionally reported seeing a marker bearing the name M. Haas among the rows of crosses, only to find it missing when they return to the same location. Perhaps the most fitting epitaph for Malcolm Hayes comes not from military records or official investigations, but from the words of a fellow sniper who served in his unit. In a letter to Hayes's family in Sussex, sent in August 1944 but only declassified in 1969, Corporal Frederick Merritt wrote, "I cannot tell you what happened to Malcolm because nobody knows, but I can tell you what he told me the night before he vanished. He said that when you look at a man through a scope long enough, eventually he looks back. He said sometimes he felt like he was on both ends of the rifle at once. I thought it was just the strain talking. Now I'm not so sure. Whatever happened to Malcolm, I believe he saw something through that scope that changed him, something that made him understand too much about what we were doing. And sometimes, late at night when I'm on watch, I find myself afraid to look through my own scope in case I see Malcolm looking back." Merritt himself survived the war, but suffered from what would now be recognized as severe post-traumatic stress disorder. His medical records, declassified in 1990, indicate that he experienced recurring nightmares in which he observed himself through a rifle scope, unable to determine whether he was the observer or the target. He was eventually diagnosed with combat-induced schizophrenia and spent the remainder of his life in a veterans' hospital in Surrey, where he died in 1972. The most human dimension of the Hayes mystery lies perhaps in its implications about identity and perception. In the moment of aiming at another human being, Hayes seems to have experienced a profound dissolution of the boundaries that normally separate self from other, observer from observed, killer from killed. Whether this experience was purely psychological or represented something more inexplicable, it speaks to the fundamental fragility of human perception and identity. Dr. James Richardson a philosopher who has written extensively on the ethics of warfare, suggested in a 2014 analysis of the Hayes case that it represents the ultimate moral paradox of killing at a distance. He wrote, "The sniper embodies the modern technological approach to warfare, clinical, detached, mediated through optical devices that create both visual intimacy and emotional distance." Hayes' experience, whether delusion or something stranger, represents the collapse of this artificial distance. In that moment, he became both killer and killed, both subject and object, trapped in a loop of perception that transcended the moral firewall modern warfare tries to construct. The case of Malcolm Hayes stands as a stark reminder of the psychological toll of warfare. Beyond the physical destruction and obvious traumas lies a more insidious danger, the way combat can fundamentally alter perception, identity, and the boundaries between self and other. In the intensely focused world of a sniper, where life and death balance on a hair trigger, and the line between observer and target blurs with each hour spent looking through the scope, perhaps the greatest danger isn't the enemy's bullet, but the slow dissolution of the self. Military records list Malcolm Hayes simply as one of thousands who never returned from Normandy. His official status remains killed in action, though no body was ever recovered. His name appears on the Bayeux Memorial among those with no known grave, a silent testimony to the unknowable fates that await in war. In the archives of military psychology, however, the Hayes case represents something more profound, a warning about the fragility of human perception and identity under extreme conditions. Long before post-traumatic stress was recognized as a formal diagnosis, Malcolm Hayes seems to have experienced a fracturing of self so complete that it somehow manifested in physical evidence that defies explanation decades later. The Norman countryside has long since healed the visible scars of war. The hedgerows that once concealed German machine guns now peacefully divide verdant farmland. The church at Tilly-sur-Seulles stands restored, its bell tower offering views across rolling hills that no longer conceal danger. But beneath this tranquil surface, the land holds memories and perhaps secrets that remain unresolved. For those who study the psychological aspects of warfare, the Hayes case represents an extreme example of what can happen when a human mind is subjected to the unnatural act of methodical killing. Most who experience combat trauma exhibit more recognizable symptoms: nightmares, flashbacks, emotional numbness. Hayes's apparent dissolution of self represents something more profound, a complete collapse of the boundaries that separate observer from observed, past from present, self from other. Whether Hayes deserted, died by enemy action, took his own life, or experienced something beyond conventional understanding, his case stands as a testament to war's power to distort not just landscapes and bodies, but perception itself. In the strange evidence left behind, the mirrored calculations, the impossible photographs, the duplicate identification tags, we glimpse a mind that could no longer maintain the artificial separation between killer and killed. The church bell in Tilly-sur-Seulles rings every hour, marking time as it has for centuries. Local residents say that occasionally, in the early morning hours around 3 a.m., the bell seems to toll an extra time, a phantom ring with no visible cause. Those who have heard it describe a sound slightly different from the regular toll, slightly flatter, as if coming from slightly farther away, or perhaps from a slightly different time. A group of paranormal investigators who visited the church in 2013 claimed to have recorded this phantom toll. Sound analysis revealed a curious anomaly. When played simultaneously with a recording of the normal bell, the two sounds created a perfect cancellation pattern, resulting in silence. Sound engineers consulted by the group described this as acoustically impossible, unless the second recording was an exact inverse of the first, a mirror image in sound. The mystery of Malcolm Hayes remains unsolved, one of many loose threads in the tapestry of war that covered Normandy in the summer of 1944. His last shot, whether fired or unfired, whether aimed at another or himself, whether occurring at 3 a.m. on June 19, 1944, or in some moment outside of conventional time, continues to echo, a reminder that some aspects of human experience in war remain beyond our capacity to fully understand or explain. Some wounds never heal because they exist beyond the physical. Some disappearances remain unresolved because what vanished was not merely a body, but something more fundamental, the coherent sense of self that we all take for granted until it's tested beyond endurance. Malcolm Hayes looked too long and too deeply into the abyss of war. What looked back at him through his own scope remains unknown. The fields of Normandy are quiet now. But for those who know where to look and what to listen for, echoes of the past sometimes break through, not as ghosts or supernatural phenomena, but as reminders that human perception is far more fragile, and reality far more malleable than we care to admit. The line between observer and observed, between killer and killed, may be thinner than we think. Malcolm Hayes crossed that line and vanished into the space between moments, leaving behind only questions that have no answers and evidence that makes no sense. Perhaps that is his true legacy, not as a soldier, but as a warning about the limits of human perception and the fragility of identity when pressed beyond endurance. His last shot continues to echo across time, reminding us that some aspects of war remain beyond our capacity to fully comprehend.